Chapter 15 The Carolinas. My wife and I arrived in Charlotte in early 1971, and we got a house near Rip Hawk. Rip and his wife were really good to us. They both went out of their way to make us feel at home and comfortable in Charlotte, and Rip's wife would go see my wife and spend time with her while I was on the road. My first appearance in the Carolinas was in the Greensboro Coliseum, during Rip Hawk and Swede Hansen's match against Paul Jones and Nelson Royal for the Atlantic Coast Tag Team title. For the finish, I rolled under the bottom rope while the referee's back was turned, and pile drove Paul so Rip and Swede could win the match. In addition to managing the tag team champions, I was booked into a singles program with Jerry Brisco, where we went around in a series of Indian strap matches. He whipped me all throughout the Carolinas with that strap, and the fans loved every second of it. Jerry and I were actually good buddies, and we hung out a lot, though never in public. Since we couldn't be seen together, he would come over to my place, and when we were on the road, we would hang out in each other's hotel rooms. I also got into a singles program with Thunderbolt Patterson. Remember how in Dallas I had to lobby to feud with Tiger Conway because whites and blacks didn't generally wrestle each other? It was a similar situation in the Carolinas, and the other guys on the roster weren't exactly lining up to work with Thunderbolt. The Missouri Mauler, Brute Bernard, Rock Hunter, and Ole and Gene Anderson flat out refused to go out there and get all sweaty with Thunderbolt, and since I don't have a prejudiced bone in my body, I was more than happy to do it. Thunderbolt and I even had a boxing match in Raleigh, North Carolina, with Joe Louis as the referee. We sold the building out, and even though the house only brought in $15,000, Mr. Crockett was so generous that he paid me and Thunderbolt $1,000 each. At one point, Ole Anderson left for Florida, so the search was on to find Gene Anderson a new tag team partner. Since Rip Hawk and Swede Hansen were going to be involved in a program with Gene and his new partner, Rip, Swede, and I were invited to the meeting to meet Gene's potential new partner. The three of us showed up and sat down with Jim Crockett, his booker Johnny Weaver, and Gene Anderson. At that point, Art Nelson, who I hadn't seen since my days in Amarillo, walked in and as soon as he saw me, began sweating profusely. As I detailed earlier, Art wasn't thrilled to be my tag team partner in Amarillo, and ended up being really mean to me. I guess when he saw me sitting in on the meeting, he thought I was going to prevent him from getting this plum position because of the way he treated me in the past, but I never did things like that. When Mr. Crockett asked Rip, Swede, and I what we thought about putting Art with Gene, I was the first one to speak up, saying, I think it would be great. I used to work with him, now I can work against him. As soon as I said that, Art mellowed right out, and stopped his sweating. Later he told me he was sorry for the way he treated me, but I never held what happened in the past against him. Besides, I could understand, I wouldn't have wanted to be Gary Hart's tag team partner either. Ironically, Art Nelson ended up becoming one of my best buddies in wrestling, and we even got into a singles program together, where we had a few boxing matches against each other throughout the Carolinas. Years later, after he retired from wrestling, he went to Las Vegas and got a job as a security guard at the Mint Hotel. My wife's two aunts would take the shuttle out to Las Vegas every 8 weeks, and Art would always show them a lot of respect, take good care of them, check them in and out, make sure everything was okay, and tell them what a great guy I was. So what started out as a shaky relationship between us, over the years, developed into a real fondness for one another. Trips in the Carolinas tended to be long, and I mostly traveled with Rip Hawk and Swede Hansen. Rip and Swede would have no problem downing a half-gallon of Crown Royal as they careened down the highway, but whenever I filled up my corn cob pipe with marijuana, they looked at me as if I was some kind of evil, deranged freak. Meanwhile, these guys were driving 90 miles per hour drunk. Pot smoking was seriously frowned upon in the South in 1971, though. One night, after the matches in Greensboro, I offered to drive Frank Morrell to his hotel in Charlotte. It was 2 a.m. when we got there, and the town was asleep. As I pulled into the hotel parking lot, he and I lit up a number and spent about 15 minutes chatting in my car. We finished the joint, and I went home. The following morning, Rip Hawk called me at home and told me that Mr. Crockett wanted to see me in his office at noon. When I asked him what time we should meet up to go to Mr. Crockett's office, Rip told me that Mr. Crockett wanted to see me alone. That was odd. I had met with Mr. Crockett 4 times at that point, but always with Rip and Swede. Then, it hit me that my meeting might have something to do with my recent no-selling for George Becker. George had been Jim Crockett's booker for many years, and Mr. Crockett was very fond of him. I had recently been put in a series of matches against him, but at the time, he was 60 years old, weighed 185 pounds, and had a pot belly. Even though I had wrestled older guys like Sam Menaker and Lord Athold Layton, they still looked healthy and strong, and my selling for them was believable. George, meanwhile, looked like a frail, little old man. Jim Crockett ran the Mid-Atlantic Territory. He was a great guy, both in heart and in stature, easily tipping the scales at 500 pounds. One of his favorite foods was fried pies. I could be talking to him about the main event in his most important town, but if someone came in with a fried pie, he would chase me out of his office. That's the kind of guy he was, so all his stooges would sneak in fried pies for him to eat. At noon, I went to Mr. Crockett's office, and it was just him and I. As soon as I sat down, he said, "I heard you were smoking dope in a hotel parking lot last night with Frank Morrell." To say the least, I was taken aback, and asked him where he heard that. To his credit, he didn't play any "I'm not telling" games. "Bunk Harris saw you guys out of his hotel window, so don't try to deny it," he said. "It was you and Frank Morrell, and you were in that little red Porsche of yours." What could I say? He was right. "If you're going to smoke that stuff here, do it at your house," he continued. "This is your only warning, and if I hear that you're out and about doing it again, you're out of here." Then, just as I expected, he brought up my no selling for George Becker, and asked why I was doing that. I plead my case, saying I'm 6 feet 4 inches and 255 pounds, and he's 5 feet 9 inches and looks like a little old man with a pot belly. Mr. Crockett just sighed and said, "You know that and I know that, but the fans don't. They only know that when he hits you, you don't fall down." I got the point and assured him, "Mr. Crockett, from now on I will fall down if George even looks at me." Mr. Crockett gave me a big smile, and we ended the meeting on a positive note. During the spring of 1972, I started to hear rumblings that Jim Barnett was selling his promotion in Australia, so I picked up the phone and called Jim in Sydney. I asked him about the rumors, and he confirmed them, explaining that it was getting difficult to do big business after the Australian dollar was devalued by more than a third. Plus, he was extremely homesick for America. He then told me that he had smoothed things over with Sir Frank Packer, the president of the network, and would like to bring me back for his last tour of Australia. I was completely honored, and jumped at the chance. Jim told me he was going to bring back all of his stars for the last 3 months of 1972, during which time he would also bring in the guys that new owners wanted to introduce. The new owners were the father and son team of Roy Welch and Buddy Fuller from Tennessee, and Jim told me that he expected his crew to put over their talents so that they could have a fair chance of success. I didn't care what Jim's conditions were, there was no way that I was going to miss the farewell tour in Australia. I let Jim Crockett know I would be finishing up in September, thanked him for all the success and good times I had in the Carolinas, and assured him that if there was anything I could do for him on the way out, I would. He decided to send me out in style, and booked me in loser leave town matches with Jerry Brisco in every city in the Carolinas. Needless to say, I was more than happy to do the job in each and every match. On the day I was leaving Charlotte, Jim Crockett asked me to stop by his office because he wanted to talk to me. When I got there, he said, "Some of my friends are buying into Australia, and they're worried that the transition won't go smoothly. I'm hoping that you will be as cooperative as you can, and that you'll do whatever they ask of you on your way out. Can I tell my friends that they can count on you?" "Of course you can, Mr. Crockett," I earnestly replied. "Anything I can do in any way, I'm happy to do it." I was sincere. Mr. Crockett had treated me wonderfully, and made me a lot of money. Mr. Crockett was very happy to hear me say that and assured me, "Anytime you want to come back here, I answer this phone. You just call and you've got an open door."